Good afternoon and welcome to this Chemistry World webinar. I'm Ben Valsler, Chemistry World's digital editor, and I'm coming to you from my study/storage room, which I think is probably quite appropriate as today's webinar is about flexible working. Also joining me on screen is Rachel Dance from the Cambridgeshire Deaf Association. She's going to be with us throughout the entire webinar, so if Rachel's presence is useful for you, do feel free to resize the window, move it to wherever you find most convenient. And before we get into the meat of today's webinar, let's look at the platform we're using, which is GoToWebinar. That should appear as a strip down one side of your screen. You can move it around, resize different components of it, but it's also the key to how you interact with our guests today. So usually towards the bottom, there is a box for questions. Any question you put in there will go to us as the organisers, but we will also put it to our speakers for today. So if there's anything that occurs to you at any point throughout the webinar, do pop it in there as a question. We will do our best to get through as many questions as possible towards the end of the webinar today. Now, this is the second webinar in our Building a Better Chemistry Culture series. So what we are hoping to do with this series, working with the Inclusion and Diversity team at the Royal Society of Chemistry, is to support the chemical sciences community in response to and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. We're looking at themes such as managing isolation, bullying and harassment, coping with loss, managing uncertainty and lack of control, and professional and personal relationships. If you look at chemistryworld.com/webinars, you'll find the first in the series, which was all about the power of kindness. And today's webinar is about flexible working. So both in the context of COVID-19, but also as part of the ongoing conversation about how we can learn from this situation to support more flexible work environments. We'll look at the psychology of remote working as applied to individuals, teams, and organizations. We'll look at creating community in order to counter these COVID-19 closures, and we'll look at enabling and supporting flexible work environments. We have three guests with us today. They are David Sales, who's a knowledge expert in the field of leadership, communications, and the brain science of people working together effectively. He's Director of First Ascent and Emergenetics UK, and is the Head of Training at St John's Innovation Centre, Cambridge. We're also joined by Claire Murray. Now, Claire is an Irish chemist who spends her days obsessing over the shapes of molecules at Diamond Light Source. She's currently a visiting scientist at BAM in Berlin, and she believes in the power of community to humanize science, and she actively seeks to build inclusivity into her work. And then finally, we'll be joined by Anna Cox, who is Professor of Human-Computer Interaction in the UCL Interaction Centre. She's also Vice Dean of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion in the Faculty of Brain Sciences. Her current research focuses on work and well-being in the digital age. So they're exactly the right people to talk to us about how we do flexible working, how we can make the most of it, how we can maintain our community bonds whilst working from slightly untidy studies and box rooms like this one right here. But that's quite enough from me. For now, what we're going to do is hand over to David Sales. So as I said, an knowledge expert in the fields of leadership, communications and brain science. So he's the right sort of person to kick off with this week's topic, or this month's topic. He is going to pick up and give us a presentation based on his own work and his own experience. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ben, and it's great to be here with you all. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk through the psychology of working from home and remote working. I will cover that off at the level of the individual, the team, and the organisation. Hopefully you'll find this enjoyable. It should last about 10 to 12 minutes, and the slides will be available afterwards. Let me just start by, sorry, Ben, just trying to get slides to move on. My agenda today. I will touch on some key areas of brain science. It's a really fast developing area, and I think we've probably all been talking about how this situation over the last few months has affected our minds and our brains. Some people have been enjoying aspects of it and others definitely haven't. So we'll look at some key areas of kind of brain science, what might be going on in us individually, but also in teams and organizations. And we'll look at it from those three levels as we go through the presentation. looking forward to any questions you may have, but we're going to handle those at the end of the webinar once you've heard from all three of the presenters. So let me start off by talking about this thing between our ears. The scientists often refer to it as the social brain, and there's good reason for that. Our brain knows and is designed for us to work effectively and to succeed in groups. Human beings can't work effectively alone, not for any sustained period. We are designed to work in groups where we all bring different things to those groups, different skills, different attributes. And because of that need to work in groups, we are hyper-tuned. Our brains are hyper-tuned to other people around us. We are constantly seeking and taking in signals about the people around us. And in particular, we are assessing whether we trust those people around us. And they're, of course, doing the same to us. And our brains are very focused on this. A huge part of our processing power is picking up signals from those around us so we know if we are feeling safe and comfortable. So put us into the situation that we've been in for the last few months, or indeed if we are working remotely from our team or our organisation for a while, which most of us have been forced to do over the recent weeks, then our social brain starts to feel a little bit challenged, or it can do. Some really interesting work by someone called David Rock. If you are interested in how the brain operates, particularly in the work environment, look him up. Great book, Your Brain at Work. I would strongly recommend it. But David has picked out 5 key factors that we need to be really aware of when we think about how our brain may be feeling at any particular time. And these factors can cause our brain to feel a bit discombobulated sometimes. Other times, if we get the factors right, it can make our brain feel very comfortable, and we get that nice, warm, fuzzy feeling that we're in a comfortable environment and that we are trusted and we trust those around us. So those 5 factors, first of all, our brain loves to feel that we have appropriate status. If our status is threatened, we don't like that. So we're going to talk about what that might mean in a second. Certainty, our brains are designed to seek and appreciate certainty to different degrees for each of us, but as a general principle, the human brain likes to be able to predict what is about to happen, whether that's in the next few minutes or the next few days. Autonomy, we like to believe when we come into work particularly that we are autonomous human beings that know what we're doing, then we're seen to be professional and we can be left to get on with our own work but take support when we need it. And relatedness as well, we do like to believe we're part of a team that we trust and that everyone else in the team trusts each other. And then finally, fairness. Our brains hate it if we see unfairness happening around us. It doesn't have to be unfairness towards us personally. It could be between 2 other people, but we do not like that. So how can we think about these 5 triggers, if you like, in terms of ourselves in the recent or in the situation that's ongoing for a lot of us, where we're working remotely and we're having to work flexibly, typically away from our workplaces or away from our teams? Well, here's a few tips. In terms of managing ourselves, to feed our need for status, let's reach out and stay involved. Don't wait for people to contact us. If there is something going on and we feel that we should be involved in that, be proactive and reach out and get involved. Don't wait for people to contact us. Certainty. We have to acknowledge uncertainty in the current situation, but we can, to a degree, take responsibility for creating as much control as we can through plans and decisions. And some of us are better at planning than others, let's admit that. But we probably need to do a little bit more planning and a little bit more clear decision making in this current situation where everything is uncertain. In terms of autonomy, if we find ourselves being actively micromanaged, and some of us, unfortunately, will have colleagues that try and actively micromanage us, we have to push back because they may be exaggerating that tendency because their brains are under stress at the moment as well. In terms of relatedness, join up with virtual peer groups. You might not be able to meet in person, but join appropriate groups either in the work environment or the social environment to feel connected with people that you trust. And finally, fairness. This current situation can feel incredibly unfair sometimes, and our brains will often catastrophize. So try and really be rational. If you're feeling something's unfair, is it really unfair, or is it actually that my brain's just exaggerating that under the current stresses? If we think about the team, if you're managing a team or if you're part of a team, let's make sure we're giving as much positive feedback as we can at the moment. That will feed everyone's sense of status. Just because we're remote or distant doesn't mean we should be giving less feedback. In fact, we should probably give him more, because generally the visual body clues that are happening all the time at work will not be happening as much as they might normally. In terms of certainty, if you are leading a team, try and help that team create certainty through very overt plans, decisions, communications, contingency planning, regular meetings, that kind of thing. In terms of autonomy, if you think you might micromanage occasionally, hold back. Try not to be micromanaging people. Some of us tend to do that a little bit more than others. It's perfectly normal that we're all on a range. Some will prefer to do that more than others, but try to kind of reduce it if you find yourself doing a little bit more of that at the moment. And then in terms of relatedness, try and get the team together as often as you can. Video is better than audio. Visual signals are very powerful. It's never going to be the same as being together as in person, but it's certainly better than no contact at all or just phone contact. And then finally, in terms of fairness, just because we're working in an unusual situation at the moment does not mean as a team manager or a team leader, we should not be addressing underperformance. If we don't do that, the rest of the team will see that someone else is getting away with underperformance, and it will have the same negative impact that it can have even when we're working in the normal environment. Next, you will have heard of a hormone called oxytocin. Sometimes it's called the trust hormone, or even the love hormone sometimes, but in work I think we'll refer to it as the trust hormone. And this is the hormone that gives us that warm fuzzy feeling that we're in a trusting environment, we trust the people around us. And at work, trust really is the foundation of engagement and productivity. If people are not feeling that they're in a trusting environment, their productivity will go down. And we generate this in our colleagues and in our teams through our behaviours and our language. And one of the things that we have to be very aware of is that each one of us has very different preferences in terms of the behaviours we like to see in colleagues and the way that we think and we like to communicate with other people. So we have to recognise that we're all very different in terms of what will make us feel comfortable in terms of behaviours and thinking. And one of the things we need to avoid in this whole area is we must move on from some out-of-date myths, I think, and old science. So kind of this distinction between left and right brain thinking, any gender or cultural generalizations about how the brain works need to be kind of put to history. And in some organizations, we're working with kind of psychometric tools that really are quite old and were not even accurate when they were developed. So we have to make sure we're using the right tools and the right science as we think about this. But really the main message for trust is we have to focus on individualizing our interactions and communication. One size does not fit all. You can't communicate to your team, for example, in one style, and just because it's a comfortable style for you doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. You have to think about what every individual wants. And that can mean spending a lot of time on communications. So just to give you an example, I'm going to use one model here from a company called Emergenetics, and they talk about our different behaviours, preferences that we have as individuals, and there's 3 axes. So just to give you a feel for this, expressiveness is one. So we know some people talk more than others and like to talk more than others. That's normal, it's fine. But in the situation we're in, you may find that some people around you do want to spend more time talking, whereas others will be quite happy to sit back and listen. Acknowledge that that is fine. All of your team will probably be on different places along the spectrum. Your job is to give them what they would like. So the people that need to talk more, make sure you do that with them. Those that want to are quite happy to listen or maybe not have as much contact, then that's also fine as well, but just adjust it to the person. Assertiveness is another attribute that's important. So some people have got a preference in terms of how they like to assert and manage things around. They like a faster pace, they like to be getting on with it. You'll know who I'm talking about in your colleagues and teams, whereas other people would like to go at a steadier pace and get more consensus before making decisions and moving on. Recognize where people are on that spectrum and adjust to it. And then in terms of flexibility, we all react differently when someone asks us to be flexible and to change. Some people go with change really easily and don't need much time spent thinking about it, whereas other people like to be able to ask a few questions before they'll go with your latest change idea. Again, just recognize that everyone's different and deal with them individually. In terms of thinking, there are basically 4 different ways that our brains think. I mean, there are many ways that we think, but just in very general terms, we can think of 4 different ways, and we all do all of these. It's just we have some preference for them. So if you've got people in your team or you're communicating with that have got a bit more of an analytical preference, then you will need to be giving them the data and the analysis. You can't get away without doing that. So just face up to it, even if it's not a preference for you. Other people will want more information around plans and to be sure that things are practical. Another group, again, an element of all of us will want to see that when decisions are being made or meetings are happening, that people are being taken into account. And then finally, some people who have a conceptual thinking preference will be much more interested in the vision and the long term and joining different things together to create a logical story for them. So just think about, if you think about your team and your stakeholders, if you like, where might they sit on this range, and might they need to adjust my communications to be effective for them? Because remember, you're now communicating, particularly when we're remote and flexible, through a much more limited medium than when we're face to face. So you might need to overemphasize some of these things. So some tips in terms of managing yourself. First of all, recognize your own preferences, have a think about where you might be on those ranges and accept that, you're great as you are, but don't feel a bit odd just because you're quite happy working from home when people around you are not. That's normal. Everyone will have a different reaction. You've just got different preferences. Find opportunities to use those strengths that you've got where you have got preferences. You can maybe support other people that don't have those, and ask other people to support you where you don't have a preference. And most importantly, we will all be daily bumping into people that have got different preferences to us. Our brains are brilliant at getting irritated by people that are different to us, so try not to. In terms of teams, if you're managing the team, recognize all your team members will have different preferences and individualize your approach to them. Celebrate that diversity within the team and use it. Give people tasks they're going to find easier and more comfortable with, and focus on, if you do see any tensions arising, and there will be a few obviously in the current situation, if you're the team leader, drop in on those quickly and try and ease them. Don't let them fester. I just wanted now, just to finish off, look at the organisation level, very much focused at individuals and teams so far, but let's go up a layer, if you like, and think about the organisation and what might be going on here right now. And an organisation could be an entire organisation, or it could be a division or quite a big chunk of an organisation, but a significant group of people. Ultimately, we want an organisation to be sustainable and resilient, and if we were going to simplify that, we might say what we mean is that organisation can prosper year after year in a dynamic and changing environment. What we know now is that the dial has moved. This situation over the last few months, employees now will expect and demand more remote and flexible working. It was always coming. It was always going to be here within a few years. This has just accelerated it, and the dial will not go back to where it started. Maybe in a few organizations, the organizations will revert to exactly the same way of working, but that will very often be against the resistance from the employees who have found benefits in the current situation. It's not to say we permanently want to be in the extreme that we're in, but that dial has definitely moved. So organizations will need to think about that in terms of their working practices. And there really is not going to be a return to the past normal. People will be expecting to have more flexibility, to have the capability to work remotely and to mix and match much more than perhaps we did in the past. And then finally, we can actually think of the organisation as a human or as an organism. That is quite often an analogy that is used. So we can think about SCARF from an organisation point of view as well. And here's some questions to think about for your organisation. In terms of status, is your organisation adopting the contemporary and leading edge practices that people will expect in the workplace now in terms of flexibility and diversity? That's a really good question if you're the leader of an organisation to be asking yourself and your executive team or your board. In terms of certainty, are we as clear as we really could be in terms of our policies, promises and expectations on people? If we're going to work more flexibly and remotely, there'll be, by default, there's likely to be less immediate controls and certainty on what's happening with people. So we might need to work really hard on having good policies, promises and procedures. In terms of autonomy, the dial has moved. We are going to have to work out how we give more self-control to employees and abandon any relics of presenteeism that might still have existed in organisations, or where an organisation or individual managers and leaders might try to preserve presenteeism. The tide is turning now. We can't go back. In terms of relatedness, to help people who are working remotely and flexibly, we may need to invest a little bit more in the technology to allow trust to be as effective as we can. I think a lot of organisations have upgraded their tech in the last few months. We're going to need to think about that in a longer term. And then finally, in terms of fairness, we may need to adopt new approaches to performance and reward, because we won't necessarily be seeing people face to face as much as we were in the past, and therefore our traditional mechanisms of assessing whether people are performing well may not work as much as they did in the past. So we may need to think differently about how we do that, which would not be a second too early, in my opinion. We've got a lot of out-of-date procedures in terms of performance management and reward in many organisations. So folks, that's all from me. I hope that was useful. I look forward to any questions you may have at the end of this session, but for now I'm going to hand you back to Ben.
Well, thank you ever so much, David. That was David Sales, and I can see already that we've had quite a few good questions in for David. He's going to stick around with us until the end of the other presentations. So if there are any other questions, if David's inspired you, you'd like to know how to take these ideas further forward, then do just drop us a line in the GoToWebinar questions box there, and we will make sure that we try and put them to David at the end of the presentation. Thank you once again, David. Next guest is Claire Murray. Now, Claire is an Irish chemist, and she works normally at the Diamond Light Source synchrotron. She's currently over in Germany, in Berlin, at BAM. I'm calling it BAM, but I'm sure Claire can introduce it properly. I just don't want to offend anybody with my poor German pronunciation. But Claire, as I said in the introduction earlier, she works in a complex area of chemistry that involves some fairly big teams and a lot of interesting levels of teamwork, and she really believes in the power of community to humanize science, and she seeks to include and build inclusivity into her work. So Claire, thank you for joining us, and I shall let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Ben, and hello everyone. It is a really big pleasure to be here. I am going to be talking entirely about community, and I think it's really important to start actually with something that we all should be thinking about in our chemistry community, and thinking about how we can make space for our colleagues who are Black, because obviously Black lives matter just as much as community matters. So I think this is a really important preface to what I'm about to say, because for me, inclusion is so important in community. There's space for everyone, and I'm really excited about what the RSC is going to do to address that, because I know they've got big plans. So I'm going to start with a poll question, because for me, one of the things I've discovered is that community is one of the critical things for me to be able to survive and to thrive in chemistry. And so what I would like to know is, over the past, say, 2 or 3 months, do you feel connected to your community? So I don't know if Ben wants to launch the poll for that, please.
I shall launch the poll now. So you will see on your screen a few options, basically yes, no, not really sure. So do tick the box that you think is most appropriate for your answer. Let's go now. Thank you ever so much to everybody who voted in the poll there. Now, I'm really impressed that 82% of our attendees voted in that. So it should give us a really strong idea of everybody who's here, whether they feel connected to their community or not. And pretty much all the way through, it's a very, very tidy 60-40 split. And 60% of our attendees do feel connected to their community and 40% don't. Now, we are a self-selecting community of people who've chosen to attend a webinar about flexible working. Maybe that will have biased the results a little. Your face makes me think that wasn't what you expected, Claire.
No, I think, to be honest, I think a lot of people, from what I've seen in conversations and in talking to people, a lot of people feel very disconnected because they're very disconcerted by the environment we're in. They're normally used to a situation where they get to interact with their colleagues on a daily basis. So but I'm really pleased that 60% of people feel connected. I think that's a really good and that's excellent. But I think the 40% of the people that I would like to try to reach and to try to understand how they're feeling at the moment and why they're feeling that way, because that's obviously quite concerning for the chemistry community as a whole. Because chemistry community relies on chemistry, right? That's what we connect through, that's what we speak through. And one of the things that I think a lot of people forget is actually that chemistry is not really done anymore by an individual. It's not one person sitting in a lab or sitting in their room or sitting in their studio doing work. It's a team, and that's what makes us so much more powerful. And that's what I've been trying to explore, is actually how, as an individual, can I explore some of the team projects that I have and to kind of build those projects to make sure that I can myself maintain connection, but also help others maintain connection. And
excellent.
I think,
sorry to interrupt, Claire. I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone for completing the poll. There will be another poll in a few minutes, so do keep that level of engagement up. I will stop sitting here nodding. I shall let you take it away without my interruption.
Fantastic, thank you, Ben. So, thinking a bit more about this, how does the community work when we're all remote is something that I think is really important. Like I said, chemistry community is connected by chemistry. And where I work in the UK, Diamond Light Source, it's a particle accelerator, also known as a synchrotron. So I'm just going to give Rachel a second to sign that because it's quite difficult. Fantastic, thanks, Rachel. And it's quite a tricky thing to actually maintain the synchrotron whilst we're in a situation where a lot of people can't go to work, because we also can't go to work. So what's been really cool is that Diamond has been working on the virus, so looking at the shape of COVID and also looking at potential drugs and also vaccine candidates with the minimum amount of staff under the safest conditions possible over the past lockdown, so over the past 3 or 4 months. They've been working on it since January, and all of the data is open access. So they are trying to maintain community even in this difficult time, but obviously prioritizing the safety of staff, because that's incredibly important. So that's kind of how you would maintain science active, but how do you maintain, your internal community? So how do you reach in? And I think that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, because we have a situation where a lot of PhD students, a lot of postdocs, the escalator for career pathways continues to roll. They need opportunities, they need learning opportunities, development opportunities. They need to be able to get the same opportunities as other students would have when they're not in a pandemic. And so some of the things that I've been exploring in teams, so I've been working with others in that, which exactly relates to what David's talking about before, include actually building a lecture series with my friends at BAM. And this has been tremendous fun, both for myself and for my colleagues, because we're able to platform some incredibly exciting speakers, and also give PhD students and postdocs opportunities to learn about new techniques and new science whilst they're in this lockdown period. And I think it's a really exciting time for us to be able to identify new ways to communicate and to build community. Speaking of which, when we think about PhD students particularly, for example, at the start of lockdown, in the group here at BAM, we had a bit of a situation where how do you maintain conversational community, like the sort of informal community that often drives some of the best interactions you might have in your day-to-day life. And one of the things that we developed was a journal club. So it's quite simple. Basically, once a week, somebody presents a paper. I am quite militant about the paper because I only let that person present 6 slides. And that's quite important, because the important part about Journal Club is it's not really the paper itself, it's actually the conversation that follows, because that's what drives communities, that people are actually talking to each other, sharing ideas, and also identifying potential collaboration opportunities or potential to do, different experiments together. And that's been a really powerful thing for us, because it's something to look forward to. It's only once a week, it's on a Friday, and it's a kind of a lifting thing. And what's really helped with that, and I know Anna is going to address that in her talk, is actually that we also have a quiz. So quiz is one of the most popular parts of Journal Club. It makes everyone really, really happy. After we do all the discussion, we have a very quick quiz at the end. It's just 8 questions, it doesn't take long. And it can be anything from Irish place names, it can be chemistry puns, that was quite a popular one. Or last week's was really cool, it was Black women scientists, and we were just exploring different topics and kind of having a bit of fun. And that really helps perk everyone up and also makes people feel connected in a way that is quite informal, which I think is something that can be quite tricky to emulate. Humor, obviously, there is quite an important part of that too. And I think that's what really helps make Journal Club. So last, but by no means least, is reaching out. So how do you reach out when you can't go out? And I think that's something that I feel quite passionately about. It's something that I do a lot of work on at Diamond, and it's something that we were very keen to explore. So myself and some friends, we had built a board game for secondary schools about Diamond and about scientific careers and how a lot of science, we actually built in teamwork into the board game. It's a really important part of that. But at the moment, schools aren't active. Schools aren't, well, they're under very, very limited conditions. And so we had to then kind of say, okay, how can we redo this? How can we make this possible for more people to enjoy whilst they're at home? So we pivoted to a print and play board game and have managed to make that available. We were also able to make a version for 5-year-olds, which has been really, really well received and is very cute, actually. It's a really sweet game. And that's been something that's really powerful, because you're opening the game, you're opening the game to even more people around the world. And to date, we've had over 600 people download the game from all over the world, and they've been able to learn about science and continue conversations about careers that they might struggle to do otherwise. Like I said, the future generation of scientists, they're still there. They're still waiting for us to tell them about these exciting opportunities. But at the moment, those opportunities are very much not there. People are really trying to have to, redeliver what they do in completely different ways. So it's something that I think is really important to think about, is how can you develop and deliver activities when we're in this lockdown situation. So I'm going to stop there, but I hope you are all well, and I hope you take care of yourself. And please remember that community is really, really important. It's something that's going to help us get through this and save us.
Thank you very much, Claire. We've put some resources on the screen now. We've also sent them out in the all audience chat in GoToWebinar, so if you want to click through now and grab them, you can. This entire presentation is being recorded, so if you want to come back, listen to anything David said, pick up Claire's links, anything like that at a later date, we will send you an email with a link to the recording, and that you'll be able to get to as and when you want. You can then dip in, pick up just the bits you needed to look at again. So thank you, Claire. I'm just quickly wondering, with the Diamond board game, do you have to roll the dice incredibly quickly, almost at the speed of light in a circle, in order to then work out what your next move is?
Well, there's no dice, because obviously dice is not something everyone has at home, but it's a version for the next game.
Right. Okay. And we've had a couple of questions from teachers actually. So these resources might be particularly useful as something that people can do at home that can help with their education. It's not just about engagement for professionals and researchers. These are useful tools for people who are perhaps the researchers of the future. Thank you once again, Claire.
Absolutely.
Our next guest is Anna Cox, and she is Professor of Human-Computer Interaction at the UCL Interaction Centre, or UCLIC. She's also Vice Dean for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion in the Faculty of Brain Sciences. Now, before we actually hand over to Anna, we just want to get to know a little bit more about you, and this will help Anna shape what it is that she says. So we're going to the next poll. You interact in exactly the same way as last time. The question is, how much time have you spent on your digital devices during lockdown? And your options are far too much time, not enough time, or just right. So I'll get the poll up now and then we'll see what you think. Now, I think every single one of you would have voted in that, but I've brought it to a halt when we got to about 80%. And I've got to admit, I find the answers really interesting here. But let's bring Anna in. So Anna Cox, once again, Professor of Human-Computer Interaction at UCL, should hopefully be the next face we see and the next voice we hear. And then I'll let you know what your results were. I can give you a little advance clue. Only 1% of you felt you were spending too little time on your digital devices at the moment. So Anna, I think we may be able to hear you, but let's just
Okay. Can
make
you
sure
hear
that
me?
we can hear you. Excellent, thank you. Hopefully your webcam should pop up for us soon as well. There we go. Thank you once again, Anna. So the answers to your poll question, 1% felt they were spending too little time on their digital devices, and 29% said they were about right. They're happy with how much time they're spending, which means a whopping 69% of our audience here today, our audience again, on a webinar that they've accessed through a digital device, so we may be slightly biased, think that they're spending too much time on their digital devices. Now I'm going to hand over to you to let you do your presentation through your own digital device, but let's see if that lines up with your expectations. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. So I guess I'm not all that surprised that that's the outcome of the poll, because the popular media really likes to demonize technology use and has told us for many years that we should be trying to limit the amount of time that we spend on our technology. And so I think many of us have sort of internalized a feeling of guilt about spending time on technology. And when we look at our phones, we can see that they're even designed to make us feel guilty. So our phones include tools now called digital wellbeing tools that tell you how much time you spent on your device. So they're reinforcing this idea that it's a bad thing. And then we get told we should take a digital detox. We should like lock our phones away and not spend any time on them at all. But the problem with these tools is they don't really tell us how much is okay and how much of what. So is 6 hours on my computer bad if I'm playing video games? Well, what if I'm working? I mean, 6 hours a day seems fine for work. Is it bad if I'm playing video games for that amount of time? Well, actually, I don't think it makes sense to really think about this notion of screen time. And other researchers have really done a lot of work looking at what screen time means and how bad is it for us. And they concluded it's as bad for us as eating potatoes. So I would say not something you should really worry about. And I think that we need to remember that technology is really amazing. When we think about work, it seems obvious that it's a huge enabler. Our mobile phones, our laptops and desktop computers and tablet computers enable us to work anytime and anywhere. And as David said earlier, never has it been more obvious to us than it is now, the extent to which we can actually do maybe all, but at least part of our job at home. And for many people, that's become really obvious during this lockdown period. And I think it's also important to remember that the benefits of remote working are not just for this kind of situation we find ourselves in now, but that it's a huge enabler when we think about inclusion and diversity, because it allows people who otherwise might not have been able to take part in the workforce to contribute. So these might be people with various caring responsibilities, people who have mobility problems and might find it hard to travel into work. So it's a really great thing. And of course, for those of us working in academia, remote working is something that a lot of academics have done for a long time. But if we look around our organisations, we can see that that same flexibility hasn't routinely been extended to professional services staff or even all research staff, or and certainly when we look at staff in other sectors outside of academia, I think the culture has often been one that where we can't possibly allow people to work from home because who knows what they might do or not do, more to the point, I think, is what people worry about. So I think this is something that we really need to change as we move into the new future of work. Now, remote working isn't always easy, and that's also something that I think many of us have experienced recently. So much of my research has explored the challenges of working remotely. So I've talked to knowledge workers, so for example, the types of people that work in many universities, but also people that work in other kinds of office situations. But also I've spoken to professional remote workers, such as the people that do digital piecework on online platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turk. Now, those people are often doing quite small jobs, such as labeling images or transcribing text from a scanned document into a form. And they get paid per bit of work they do. So they're often getting paid very small amounts of money for doing quite short jobs. And people all over the world are working on that platform for a huge array of employers. And I think one of the things that has struck us as really interesting when we look at all these different types of people who use their technology to work from home or coffee shops or wherever, is that many of them experience the same kinds of challenges. So one of these problems is that when you work and live in the same environment, the sort of physical and temporal boundaries that we're used to that keep our work time and our non-work time separate seem to disappear. So if you're working and living in the same space, then the idea of work-life balance or work-home boundaries seems to be a bit strange. And this can lead to a feeling of always being contactable, always being online, and that you need to be super responsive. So you can see how this happens. If your phone rings and you can see that it's your boss who's ringing, you're going to feel like you have to answer it, regardless of when that happens. And so I think it's important to think about how our own behaviour creates a culture within our teams about being always connected and always responsive. So I think we can be really explicit about our expectations in order to kind of counter this and avoid these difficult situations. So, for example, if we think carefully about when we send messages, so when I send an email out, if I do that on a Saturday, does that send a kind of cue to my team that I expect them to be working on a Saturday. And that might make me reflect on what work I'm going to do at different times and maybe change my behaviour. But if we have rules around when people are allowed to send emails, so we might do that with the best of intentions and say evenings and weekends, you're not allowed to do this. Actually, what we're doing then is limiting people's flexibility and limiting how they can work and when they can work. So rather than that, I have chosen to have an email signature that explains that I recognise that my working day isn't the same as everyone else's working day, and that I might send emails at odd times, but that doesn't mean I expect anyone to respond to me outside of their own working times. So I think, just as David said, we need to avoid presenteeism. We need to avoid telling people how to run their day and instead focus on how we can create cultures that offer this kind of flexibility about when people work, and so they can really make use of the opportunities that technology is offering to them. So as well as understanding what people find difficult when working remotely, my research has also looked at how we can help people to adapt to it. So what are the solutions to these problems they're having? And in particular, I've been looking at how we can use technology to create and maintain work-life boundaries. And some of the techniques that we've uncovered, we have been able to give them to various different types of workers. So we've given them to students, to knowledge workers, and even to junior doctors working in hospitals. And we've shown them new ways to use their devices, their apps, and their accounts, and been able to show measurable positive impacts on their well-being. So if you would like to know how to do this, how to discover these strategies, then we have them all listed on a website, which we have available. The URL is available on the slide, which we'll show you in a moment. The website is called eworklife.co.uk. And on that website, we have a list of all the different strategies, so you can browse through them and see which ones you think might be useful. But if you want some kind of personalized recommendations, we also have a self-reflection exercise. And if you take part in that, it enables us to look to see where you might be having struggles and recommend certain strategies to you to try out. Now, Claire told us about all the great work that she's been doing to help to create and maintain community within chemistry, and described how she's been doing this using digital technology as well. So I think it's really important for us to remember that one of the great things about technology is that it really helps us to connect to other people. And it doesn't do that only in terms of providing us ways to communicate. So obviously we can send text messages, we can use video conferencing, we can call people on the telephone, we can do all sorts of things like that, which we're really used to. But it also creates ways for us to have fun together. And of course, one of the most well-known ways of having fun digitally is by playing video games. And so before I finish, I want to tell you two things about video games. So first of all, David told us about the importance of connecting with our virtual peer groups. And he was completely right when he said doing that using video is much better than just using audio for connecting with others. So if you have a choice between talking on the telephone or using video, then opt for the video option. But if you try just sort of hanging out with your friends on video conference, and particularly if there's a group of you, you'll have probably noticed it can get a bit awkward. And Claire mentioned that she was using a quiz in her journal club, and that's a really good way of helping us to have fun together and sort of avoid those awkward moments that we might have. And I think if you think of quizzes as, you know, an opportunity for a game, that's going to like show you how I'm linking back to this idea of video games. There are all sorts of games you can play, and quizzes are certainly one that many people enjoy. And we've seen lots of people during lockdown engaging in sort of online pub quizzes with their friends. But in our research, we've also shown that if you play collaborative team video games with your work colleagues, that this is an effective way of building trust in online teams. So I'd recommend it to you as a thing to do, not just with your friends, but think about perhaps also playing games with your work colleagues as a way of kind of building those relationships. And the other thing I want to tell you about playing video games is that in some of our research, we've shown that it's also a really effective way of recovering from work. So I've been talking about using technology to support us in doing our work and how important it is to maintain work-life boundaries and think about the non-work side. It's playing video games in your non-work time is a real opportunity to like disconnect from work. And this is because it provides you with the opportunity to have control over something, to practice getting really good at it, which we know has benefits for us. And it's also really, really difficult to continue worrying about work when you're trying really hard to win at a game. So I want to encourage you to not worry about how much time you spend on your technology, but instead to think about what you're using it for. So perhaps think about how much time you spend working and whether you're working too much. And then think about how you might use your technology for having some fun. So I think we need to embrace it and learn new strategies for having control over it so that we can use it both for work and for play. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you ever so much, Anna. That's a very good point, that technology can often be a double-edged sword, and certainly we can waste time playing computer games, but it can also be an important opportunity to engage with your colleagues, with friends, or with people all over the world if you're playing an online video game of sorts. And it's also that good opportunity to relax, unwind, think about something that doesn't involve spreadsheets or spectra for a change. Yes. Well, thank you once again, Anna. Let's bring everybody else back in now, as we've got just under 10 minutes now for some of your questions. And thank you for all of your questions. I know a few of you asked questions as well in the registration form, so I've got a couple of those noted down. This is one. Let's start by putting this to Claire. I think the question from Nitin Kumar, who said, research settings are often very competitive. So what advice could you give to creating a sense of community in a group of people who might be seen to be competitors?
Well, I guess I would ask the question of, I would ask the question of the organization of, don't you think that these people could achieve more if they work together? Which I know is quite a basic place to start, but actually I think it's really important. I think also if we are, communicating together, we are sharing ideas, and that's going to be only a good thing for the organization. So yeah, I would encourage the organization to kind of back away from placing emphasis on the competition and instead try and invest in community.
Because quite often we find that it's in collaboration where the best things happen, really, and
Exactly.
those new ideas come. So yeah, well, thank you, Nitin, for your question. Let's dive into the questions now. I think, Anna, this one's probably for you. Can the time we spend on digital devices negatively impact our in-person relationships?
Yes. So there's been quite a lot of research about this, actually. It's definitely true that if we're trying to have a conversation with someone and as one person is there on their phone, that this is going to have some negative impact on that conversation. Like if as the person who's not being paid attention to, it doesn't feel very nice. But in fact, it's even worse than that. If the phone is just on the table and no one's looking at it, it also has a negative impact on that situation. So when we're not using our devices and we're trying to interact with people face to face, it's really important that you put them away. So keep them in your pocket or in your bag.
Wow. it's incredible that it has such an impact, just knowing that it's there, not even seeing somebody interact. I know there's been a lot of discussion about when you're watching a television program and your partner is also on their phone, that becomes a far less enjoyable experience. And certainly arguably the same for any work meeting that you have. Knowing somebody is distracted, even if it's a vitally important email, it still just makes it feel like perhaps some of us are wasting our time in those meetings. David, here's a question based on the fairness that you were talking about. I'll have to try and dig out the name. I'm afraid so many people thrown in questions now that I've lost the name of the right person. But how do we deal with fairness where we have a situation that is inherently unfair? It's one thing where we see an underperforming colleague be rewarded or not have any development. It's another thing entirely when we're in a situation like this where lab scientists can't work from home. They need access to their lab, access to their equipment, but support staff and so on can work from home. There's going to be a perception of unfairness. Can you offer any suggestions as to how we deal with that and move forward?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to recognise that our brains are hyper-tuned to unfairness, and sometimes our brains can overreact. So we need to really try and rationalise: am I really judging this as unfair to a greater degree than it is? And of course, that situation you just said, who's feeling it's unfair? Is it the people that are having to carry on working, or is it the people that are being stopped from working? Either party there could feel that this is unfair. So, but my advice would be is to, whatever it is you're feeling unfair about, first of all, is it a controllable? It may simply be that you cannot control this and you have to accept the situation. We can only control certain things in our life. Some things we can't, and we can spend an inordinate amount of time worrying about things that we can't actually control. So get it in perspective, first of all, but then really just check in with yourself and saying, am I slightly overreacting to this? And if I am, can I talk myself down?
This question's come up in a few different forms, but I think we can open this up to all of you. Let's start with Anna, I think. How can we still enable the sort of spontaneous water cooler, bump into each other in the corridor conversations that we would normally have in an office building when we're using digital technology and working remotely? And that's certainly not exclusively a COVID-19 related thing. Chemistry World has a colleague, our US correspondent, who's based in our Washington office, and we do our best to make sure that she's included in meetings, but she's never there with us when we go down to get a cup of tea, so often she'll miss out on some of those things. Do you have any strategies, any advice that could help us get over that?
I feel like this is one of those killer questions for those of us working in HCI, that we need to really solve this problem, because you're absolutely right that it's those serendipitous conversations that you have that you feel like you're missing out on if you're not included in a co-located organisation. And I don't think we have a brilliant technology solution to this yet. I wonder whether the future is something about thinking about how we connect with people using all the different channels that we have. So, video meetings are one thing, and we have to structure them, particularly when there's lots of people involved, because otherwise it turns into chaos. But having lots of chats with people using text messaging is quite a good way of sort of connecting in with people, where we don't have to have deep conversation, and we can just drop a quick line to say, oh, I was just talking to so and so about this, and sort of try and draw people into the conversation that way. There are, of course, all sorts of tools for sharing documents, and I think if we think about how we might use those in more creative ways for collaboration, that will start to solve some of this. But I don't think we have the kind of killer app for it right now.
Claire, if you could pick up on this, maybe one of the other angles of this is, at the moment, we're not going to conferences. People who, for whatever reason, can't travel to conferences also miss those opportunities. Conferences are a great way of networking, great way to meet people that you otherwise wouldn't have met. Are things like online journal clubs, quizzes, and so on that are open to a wider network, are they likely to be the future of distance networking?
I mean, I think at this stage we can't rule anything out, right? Because we don't know. I think, though, one of the things to think about when Anna was talking about like smaller, like chats and things like that, is forum like Twitter, for example, is actually quite a useful place to engage with people. And I know, like, I've actually developed collaborations through Twitter through like a couple of tweets, and so I think there's other places people can look. Thinking internally, so when you're talking about Journal Club, one of the questions that people have to answer when they're doing their presentations is actually, why is this relevant to me? So why is this paper relevant to me? And that's been incredibly powerful in kind of generating some of those interactions, because when people realize that, oh, that person was interested in, say, DFT calculations, I can help them. That's one way of kind of emulating those triggers. And I think also, so one of the great things about the group is Dr. Franziska Emmerling, she has like regular weekly meetings, and everyone has to describe what they do. And that's also quite helpful for kind of generating those cues, is because people go, oh, that person's working on X. So it's kind of creating multiple opportunities for people to connect is maybe one of the ways forward.
We're almost out of time, but I'd like to put one last question to all three of you. But just before that, Aliki Moisiadi has said that for water cooler conversations, the company they work for uses something called mysterycoffee.com, where you opt to be matched with other people from your organization, just using your email domain, and you have a mystery coffee with somebody once a week. So cool. Maybe that's one way to meet people in your organization digitally that you wouldn't normally meet. Again, a couple of people have asked this, so I won't pick out one person in particular, but if I can very quickly go all three of you, we'll start with David. You said the dial has been moved. What do you think in terms of flexible working is going to be the new normal?
I think the things that will hit initially are much more flexible start and finish times, for example, particularly for people that are living in areas where there's congestion on whatever mode of transport is. I think that will start straight away in a lot of organisations. And I think people taking, not necessarily working from home permanently, but just saying, I want to work from home this day because I've got a big thing I need to focus on. I think that will become more common. So I think that will hit fairly straight away, really.
Claire, in your line of work, what do you think is likely to be the new normal?
I think at the moment we're pushing a lot more towards remote access, so people don't have to come to site. So that's definitely going to be a big push. But I think also we need to be thinking a bit more generally about equality of access, because like online access is something that's assumed now, but that's still not, I mean, Anna can comment on that, that's still not actually true. There's a lot of people who have appalling internet connection or none at all. So I think that's something that massively needs to be addressed.
Anna, I'll let you have the last word on the new normal.
I think you touched earlier on conferences, and I think we'd already seen a lot of concern driven by the climate crisis and people thinking about how can we do conferences differently. And it's amazing to see how the academic communities have suddenly responded to trying all sorts of new ways to connect people in remote conferences. And I think we'll see hybrid conferences being the normal when we can travel again in the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you, Claire and David, as well. Wonderful to have you with us. Really nice to have some very different perspectives on this. We've seen lots of comments coming through from the audience about how much they've appreciated having you with us today, and lots of great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get time to get through them all. I'm just going to flag up a few resources for everyone here that may be useful to view after the fact. The Royal Society of Chemistry Chemists Community Fund, if you're feeling a bit isolated, if you're feeling that you need some support, then you can talk to the bullying and harassment support line. The numbers there. Chemist Community Fund do a great deal for people. Obviously, there's also external organisations like the Samaritans and Shout if you do feel that you need somebody to talk to. This whole series is about looking after your own mental health, looking at the challenges that we face throughout the COVID-19 crisis and beyond. So those resources are always there, and you can get in touch with the Chemist Community Fund about almost anything. There's always somebody there to help out with that. Thank you once again for joining us for this Building a Better Chemistry Culture webinar. The next one is on managing isolation and loneliness. We're going to look at the psychology behind isolation, its impact on mental health, experiences in the chemical sciences that lead to feeling isolated, not just being shut away at home. How diversity could lead to a sense of isolation. So if you have an impairment or you're part of a visible minority group, you can still feel isolated even when surrounded by people. And we'll be looking at finding and creating communities to counteract isolation, following on from some of the things that Claire's been talking about today. You can register for that webinar right now. It's at rsc.ly/isolation webinar. It takes place at 3:30 on the 16th of July this year, so in almost exactly a month's time. So if you'd like to know a bit more, or if you'd like to pick up the recording afterwards and you know you can't make it, register there now and you'll get an email about that straight away. And I think that's it for now. So once again, a huge thank you to all of our speakers today, to Anna, to Claire, and to David. Thank you to Rachel for doing our interpretation as well. I hope those of you who needed that benefited from having Rachel with us. Do let us know, drop us a line if this is the sort of thing you'd like to see us do more of in the future as well. And do register for the next webinar. Let us know what else you think we can do to help build a better chemistry culture. A final thank you, and a thank you from me, Ben Valsler, Chemist World's digital editor. We'll see you again at the next Building a Better Chemistry Culture webinar.